on this crisis from our guests. CNN political analyst and Washington Post columnist Josh Rogin with us here. He's also the author of Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century. Also, CNN military analyst Major General James Spider-Marks with us. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Josh, I want to ask you about the Biden-Putin phone call out with Ukraine yesterday. At this point, based on what we know, do you see any options for President Biden other than these severe sanctions, and how much support does he have from Europe for that?
Right, Christy. Well, it's clear that the Biden administration is trying to come up with more options, not for President Biden, but for President Zelensky to offer to President Putin to get him to back down. According to my sources, these include Ukraine returning to the Minsk diplomatic agreement with some concessions for Russia that include things in terms of sequencing what Ukraine will do that Russia wants. And also, the Biden administration has quietly told the Ukrainians that if they wanted to go ahead and impose a self-moratorium on joining NATO, not imposed from us, wink, wink, nod, nod, but if that was their decision, that the United States would go along with it. These are things that are seen in Kiev as non-starters. They're not in a position to give any of these things. These things would be disastrous for Ukrainian politics, and therefore it's not likely to work. But this is what the Biden people are thinking about. When it comes to Europe, it seems that the agreement on sanctions is being tested. We saw a lot of news yesterday that no longer are the U.S. and Europe considering some of the most severe sanctions, including cutting Russia off from what's known as the SWIFT system, which would be devastating to their economy. The Europeans don't seem on board with that. So we're seeing a little bit of fraying in the alliance. And this puts Biden in a no-win situation. He can either stick with the Europeans or stick with Zelensky. He seems to be choosing the Europeans. And Putin doesn't seem to be listening anyway. But you can see that the Biden administration is scrambling to try to avoid this war before it starts.
As Europe is as well. General, you just heard them say there that the U.S. said that it's unclear whether Russia will actually invade. I mean, you've got 100,000, more than 100,000 tanks and equipment and troops around the border of Ukraine. As Sam Kiley just pointed out, all of the armor that they have at the ready. Is there anything in your mind that tells you that they will not?
Well, Christy, they certainly have the capabilities to invade at any moment, literally. I mean, it could take place right now. But as we know, any type of a threat is a combination of capabilities and intentions, and that's inside. The intentions are inside Putin's head. As Josh just laid out, those diplomatic elements of power and economic elements of power are out there. They're available for Putin to advantage, but they aren't significant enough. And so now you have this military element of power, and what is NATO doing to try to deter Putin's capabilities? Well, frankly, what they're doing is prudent in that they are available to assist with what I would describe as a non-combatant evacuation operation if that were to occur, hopefully different from how it looked in Kabul this past summer. But if U.S. citizens and other nationals were in Kiev and Kiev was under attack and those folks had to be removed, I would tell you Putin would give those citizens, those foreign citizens in Kiev, an opportunity to escape. Putin doesn't want to pick a fight with the United States. Bear in mind, the United States and Russia, or the former Soviet Union, never fired a shot at each other. Is this the opportunity where we're going to engage directly against Russian forces? I don't think so. So I think what Putin understands, with all this calculus, he's not going to invade Kiev. He doesn't want to break Kiev. He doesn't want to control Kiev. Because if he put rubble in Kiev, he'd have to rebuild it, and he does not have an economy to do that. And he doesn't have the forces necessary to occupy Ukraine. That would take close to 800,000 forces. He doesn't have those forces available. So if he's going to invade, and I think he will, it'll be a limited incursion into Donbass and maybe even an advance into the Dnieper River, further to the west. That further isolates Ukraine, puts additional pressure on Ukraine, and I see that as likely because the negotiated settlement, again, as Josh described, is unlikely.
Okay. Josh, China and Russia alliance is something that I want to ask you about as well, because Australia's Prime Minister, just in the last 24 hours, called China chillingly silent on this. How would a Russia invasion of Ukraine, even if it is partial, as the general has described, how would that affect China on the global political arena?
Right. It's a fascinating dynamic, Christy, because we just saw President Putin travel to Beijing and fall asleep during the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics. And then he issued that 5,000-word statement about how close friends they are. But the 5,000-word statement didn't mention Ukraine. And it was like, well, that's kind of weird. And, it seems clear that Xi Jinping doesn't want Putin to invade Ukraine, even though he expresses lukewarm support for it in public. And the reasoning is very simple when you think about it. China has a foreign policy based on sovereignty and non-intervention, and Russia attacking another country for no reason in the middle of a pandemic destroys that. And, China doesn't want instability, and they don't want the economy to be tanked, and they don't want their Olympics to be ruined. And, it just shows you that they're not really friends. They're really frenemies, and they hate each other behind the scenes as they pretend to love each other in public. And, if you were Xi Jinping, you would be looking at this as a really bad precedent, because when China wants to invade Taiwan, they're not going to say, we're taking back Taiwan. They're going to say, oh, Taiwan's already ours. So it really hurts Xi Jinping in a number of ways. So before you think that China and Russia are like the new alliance and Kissinger's worst nightmare, blah, 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 just remember that they fear each other more than they fear us, as most dictatorships do.
Yeah, interesting. I want to go back, General, to your assessment that you believe this could be a partial invasion. If we look back at 2014, it was what Crimea faced back at that time. Do you see the intention of Russia being that it wants to, at some point, take over Ukraine, and this is a piecemeal way of doing it, that it is just something that he will gradually do? And also, the response by the U.S. and European partners, we've heard experts say it needs to be unified. If there is not that cohesion between U.S. and Europe, if there is an invasion, where does that leave us?
Yeah, Christy, those are the two elements, what you just described in your question. Those are the two things that we're looking at. Look, a limited invasion into the Donbass would allow Putin to create a land bridge into Crimea. Look at the map you guys just had up on the screen. He advances into the Donbass, and he already has forces there, right? He's had them there for a number of years. He pushes additional forces into the Donbass. He could do that without firing a shot. He could then expand to the west, and then he creates this land bridge into Crimea, creates this little statelet, which is the beginning, to the second part of your question, of a gradual atrophy of the legitimacy of the Zelensky government and Ukraine independence. And he creates a vassal state, not unlike what he's doing in Belarus right now. Right now, he has over 30,000 forces in Belarus, postured above Kiev, available to drive into Kiev if they wanted to, just level Kiev with artillery and rocket fire and air power. That is not going to happen, but he could do this in the Donbass. I hope I'm wrong about all this, but I don't see a negotiated settlement where it has to be a win-win. I love Josh's, it's not cynical, it's skeptical view of how all this is going to turn out. It's unfortunate, but we want our president to walk away with a win. But what does that look like? And I think that is kind of a status quo ante, right? Where there aren't a bunch of corpses and dead bodies in Ukraine. But maybe it's not exactly what we want. And maybe it's a little more presence, Russian presence in Ukraine. That begins the clock in terms of the downfall, the lack of independence in Ukraine. And Putin gets a win. That's a win-win. And I think that's what we have to ask.
All right. Josh Rogin, General Marks, you give us so much to think about. I always learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course. And don't forget to watch State of the Union today at 9 a.m.